happening? Okay, hello everybody. Tara Bachland here with the Wifey Wake Up podcast. I'm broadcasting to a few new channels, old channels actually, my new podcast. So if this is new to you, hello everybody. This is the Wifey School podcast. And what is Wifey School? So John and I have been happily married for over 20 years. And of course, when I say happily, it's not like this, right? There are ups and downs like anything in life, but to be married almost 25 years now and to still have an amazing time together, still love each other, and not only like the original way, like we just love each other, but to have grown together is quite an accomplishment. And you know, the stats today are terrible, are just seem to be getting worse and worse on marriage and the success of marriage, where divorce is at over 50%, and then second marriages is even worse than that, and third is practically doomed from the beginning, right? And so rather than just saying, why get married at all? I say, why give up on the beautiful, I guess it's a tradition, but it's more than a tradition. And I think it's something that so many of us innately yearn for. So how about how to make it work, right? And especially since so many people came from broken families, it's how do you learn what you didn't have modeled for you? And so what I'm really striving to do is to share what we've learned in our 20-some years of marriage and what works, what doesn't work. And I try to keep it really conceptual. I mean, there's some basic things, especially when it comes to guys. I mean, anyone who's raised boys, been around men, you know that there's actually some very basic things that work, or you learn that eventually. It's not, guys, this is not to be offensive. It's not rocket science. You're not rocket science to figure out. But for some reason, we women can end up complicating things. And so I want to cut through that and just get to the basics of what it takes to have a long, healthy, happy marriage. And of course, you're going to be going through the ups and downs and the challenges, but how do you get through them and how do you become better through it as well? So that's what Wifey School is all about. I have a little bit extra time today. I'm not rushing on to the next thing, so today's intro might be just a little bit more conversational. Feel free to chime in the comments and ask your questions. And actually, I have 2 topics planned for today. So I love days like today where I don't feel rushed to go from one thing to another. And that's my cat. I had moved her toys, but did not move them to the other room. So I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. So one of the questions that we get often is whether we're out and about or for our podcast, because John and I also have a podcast called John and Tara Podcast, is how do you keep the marriage alive for so many years? Like, how do you keep interest in each other? And so I'm going to share with you, this is actually not today's topic, but I thought I'd just kind of lead in with a good story. So this morning we trained together. John and I met when I walked into his martial arts school. And so you can imagine, yes, it was very romantic. No, actually, right initially when I walked into his school, I was there for martial arts, or I was at least checking out his school. I had studied in Brazil for a year, and while I was there, had done some capoeira. So since I had been back for a few months, I was looking for something same or similar in the area. And I had looked all over the place. I had looked over in Minneapolis, which was like 40 minutes away where I lived at the time. And through actually another Rotary student, I heard about, who is now my husband, his school. And it was like, oh my gosh, he's in my backyard. It was literally the next town over. So I went there and checked it out, and John will tell you otherwise, but I honestly did not go there checking out, was not looking for a date. I was honestly looking to train. And while I was there for the first few months, he had tried to actually set me up with a few of the other men there, and I just wasn't interested. I always had a very short dating career, I'll call it, but always had a good sense of like what was a good match for me, or what I was looking for and not looking for. Not in like an overly critical kind of way that I think women really get a bad rap for these days, because like the list is this long, right? But just like an inner sense and an inner knowing. And it's not even that I was really trying to get him, so to speak, but over time, we got to know each other. And he says, and you can see this in the John and Tara podcast as well, that what he was initially attracted to was my work ethic. Now, doesn't sound very romantic, does it? Like, oh, the thing that really appealed to me about you when we first met was your work ethic. But hearing about how dating goes, and those who've been in the dating pool a long time, hopefully, wisely, you'll come to learning what are your true values. And I think that's apparently what stood out to him. So as initially a martial arts student, which it was not easy for me, by the way, martial arts, anything physical was not I did not naturally acclimate to. So I by default had to work hard if I wanted to do anything. Anyways, long story short, we did end up getting married, and it's been over 25 years now since we've been together. And just like anything in life, whether it's your career or family, any venture, even speaking of martial arts, for example, anything that you pursue, you're going to have those ups and downs. But the success is in how do you get through those ups and downs so that it makes you stronger and better. And that's one thing when you're doing something solo, like learning an instrument or learning your career. Now, career is another thing because you have other people that you work with, but certainly a relationship is that much more difficult because you rely on the other person to participate with you to make it better. And so really that's what Wifey School is about, is from a wife's perspective, because obviously that's the only perspective that I can speak from, is what have I learned? What did I do to help get through those hard times in marriage? And common things like, I think it's pretty common that we all go through times of disappointment. Things are not happening the way that we wanted them to happen in life. Tremendous challenges, and those challenges can be within your relationship, they can be outside your relationship, they can be in family, business, and so forth. How that affects your relationship and how you deal with that, or even health issues. At some point, all of us experience a health issue that is going to affect one of the people in the marriage, and how do you sort through that? Finances, of course. And so those are all topics that I address in Wifey School. So this morning, my husband and I were training martial arts. This is, to get back to the first point, is how do you keep your relationship alive over 20 plus years? And that is absolutely, you have to keep doing things on a regular basis that light you up together. A lot of times that is going to be things that you did in the beginning. And that is the challenge too, because as life goes on, especially with kids or careers, physical capabilities, those things can change. But the more you can try to keep some semblance of that going on, the better. So for example, for my husband and I, that's largely been being physically active. We started our relationship in the martial arts gym, his martial arts gym. He was my instructor. And I think that set a really wonderful tone in the beginning of our relationship, and a foundation for us, where is something that I've always admired in him, loved about him. He's an amazing teacher, a lot of fun, and just really knows how to get out of you, especially speaking here of a person who is not naturally physically acclimated, how to get you to that next level. And so that's another component, is hopefully it's an activity that each of you can see something. It brings out the good in each of you individually and then together as well. And so for me, when we're training martial arts, I'm excited about my own development, and our interaction together is something that I look up to him in, his expertise, his ability, so many things like that, that really kindle that flame, if not light it up again so much more. And it has evolved from martial arts. At times it's martial arts. For a good number of years, it's also been mountain biking. He trained me in mountain biking so that I could be his mountain biking buddy. And he took years, patiently, he took years to do that so that that was something that we could do together as well. And we're coming back around to the martial arts realm. Again, it's something that we can easily do from home. Doesn't matter the weather. You don't need expensive equipment to do it. And you can do it at your own level and still get a lot of reward out of it. So it's something that you can do throughout different phases of your life. So that's the main key. I wanted to, through all of that, just to answer one of the questions, or one of the ways that you can keep that love, that spark alive, is you have something that you do that reignites those feelings in yourself and the other person. And the only exception I would make is I do not recommend that is like going out and bar hopping and drinking. That we've done, like we would do it in the wine vineyards, and it's a lot of fun for a while, but it can also lead down a very bad path. So that's mainly the reason I would not recommend that being your thing to do. Maybe you met in a group. Like one of the things that we did for a while also is motorcycling. My husband's been on two wheels, like he says, and since soon after he could walk. And so we had a nice cruising motorcycle, the Ducati Multistrada, which is a very nice, comfortable bike, but also very sporty. So it really suited his needs and desires. And I got to just sit back and enjoy the scenery and hang on tight to him. And we had a lot of fun doing that and traveling around. So those are just some examples. You're going to have things that are very unique to you. Maybe the motorcycle example, maybe is a classic car at a certain point in life. And you just have to, usually it is going back to what you did when you first met, what kind of made the sparks fly in you about the other person at that point in life, and bring it back into your life on a regular basis, at least on a weekly basis, no matter how busy or how difficult life is. And absolutely, what that does is when you're having fun like that, then it's easy to have conversations. What can happen in life is you go through challenges, and we've lived through this. Now I'm doing like 5 lessons in one. Okay, I've got extra time, and so of course I get into 5 topics. So this is a bonus episode. But when you go through difficult times in life, the tendency is that you shut down communication because there's friction, right? And usually sometimes one out of the couple either doesn't want that confrontation, or they find that it doesn't go anywhere, or maybe you're both very confrontative in the relationship and it ends up in constant fights. Either way, you find that through the challenges in life, instead of getting better and improving through it, you actually tear each other down, or just start separating bit by bit and aren't talking. And it makes the relationship essentially impossible then. So that's why having these, at least a weekly outing, something that you do that in and of itself is going to create conversation. Like when my husband and I would go mountain biking, it's like, you can't talk on the trail if you're really going, but afterwards it's like, oh, I remember that log, and I couldn't do that one before, but I did it this time. Or my back tire skid a bit in that corner and I didn't freak out. And it makes for a good conversation on the way home. And that's the kind of thing that you want. If you have something that you do that, like you're going to dinner and then you find yourself not talking, well, the dinner itself doesn't really lead to, you need to have some kind of adventure. And because life ultimately is an adventure, but those little adventures also help you to break outside of your mold and outside of your scenario. They're like little training sessions for how you're acting in life, how you're doing in life, instead of actually dealing in life and having to confront like how to handle this issue with the kids again, or the shingles that need to be replaced or something. You get outside of your current situation. That's why dinners are nice, and I think they need to happen also, but you need to have some kind of adventure, something that you're doing together that gets you interacting in a very different way. Then you can have different conversations, and it breaks you outside, gets you outside of your regular habits and your modes. So that is one big secret, the main one I would say, as far as how to keep your relationship alive for 20 plus years. Now I have to sneeze. Whew, good timing. All right. So that's a huge one. And at the same time, I told you that's what we did this morning, and we had a blast. So I wanted to give you some time to also tune in. And today, if you have any comments or questions, to also chime in there. I'm not able to see Instagram very well. I got to do a better setup here. So especially Facebook, YouTube, all those, I should be able to see all your comments real easily. Feel free to chime in and especially ask your questions. So today's topic is marriage isn't a mold. What do I mean by that? Well, today it's very popular to, especially young wives, to, you may have heard of the terms trad wife, boss babe. There's so many more. Homesteader, the I think queen bee, queen health something or other, and what is that? Wellness queen. And it's kind of like a fad to be an ideal. And I find it very interesting. And what I want to reassure you, especially if you're newly married or going to be married and you're thinking about your ideal life, because face it, women, that's what we do, right? We envision the life that how we want it to be different once we get married. News break. Men envision it staying the same. They want to have all the excitement, your loves and kisses and time snuggling on the couch, if that's your thing. They want it to remain the same. We envision it being different. And I want to mainly set your heart at ease that you don't have to be any of these ideals to make your marriage work. What you really need is to find out what will make your marriage work. And trying to stuff yourself in one of these molds, the trad wife, the boss babe, a homesteader, is not the secret to success. You might think that, and I'm just going to go on the trad wife thing, that you might think that he loves sundresses and he loves pies, and yes, of course he does. But what you really need to do is sit down and have, as I say, an adult talk and both discuss what you envision as your marriage, your life being in 1, 2, 5, 10 years. Also, you have to be willing to, don't be overly committed to that. What I mean is aim for that and maybe even aim beyond. But don't be so hard set on that if it doesn't happen, it's the end of your world, because that turns into resentment, and it's easy to blame your husband for that not happening. And guys, you have to be careful how much you promise. And I'm putting that in air quotes because it's really not possible to promise everything or anything, right? Anyone who's been in life long enough knows that you can't make everything happen to make everything happen. You have to go along with life. So these may be goals, but you also have to be willing to flex with them. And when you're setting yourself up to be a trad wife or a boss babe or a homesteader, know that there's something in there that appeals to you, right? The reason that you're identifying with that and are attracted to that is because there's something in there that appeals to you, and there's an underlying value. So that's something that I would encourage you to look at if you haven't already. Obviously, you found the person you're going to marry or are married to because your values match enough. So thinking that you're going to be the trad wife or whatever is like, well, yeah, that lines up. We both have these similar values in these areas. But what we women have the tendency to do is create a plan in our own mind and not bring him into the plan. And we are 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years down the road, and it's not happening the way we want it to happen, but we didn't clue them in, our husbands, into the plan early enough to be able to participate or just say, what, pump the brakes here. This does not ultimately line up with our values. Or he might say, yeah, I love pies, but I don't need one every day. And I value, he might say he values something else more than you being in the kitchen all the time, for example. So that's why it's so important to actually get to the bottom of it, of what are the values that appeal to you out of that ideal or that lifestyle model. And rather than trying to aim to be that, because realistically, if you're modeling your life after being a trad wife, a boss babe, a homesteader, all these molds, right? You're doing, in a sense, what a child would do. A child looks to the adults around them, to their models, and tries that on for size so that they can learn how to be that way, or learn how it feels to them. And usually they model the one that what feels aligns with them innately. And as an adult, what you can do is you have the ability to differentiate. You don't have to, in order to try things on for size, to adopt the whole model. You might choose just a piece of that. And that's realistically what happens in life. Realistically, as your marriage moves on, your relationship matures, what happens is that you learn to work together. You have to move along with life. If you try to stick to ideals, set plans, it's going to be harder. There are beautiful martial arts analogies in this, but I'm going to refrain from telling them. But that is the beauty, certainly, of martial arts. And I'm just giving you the big heads up, ladies, that the sooner you can adopt the mindset of, I'm going to try something on for size, but I'm going to talk about it with my husband to see how it jives with him. And also, I'm going to be willing to flex, to go with the flow, because that's how life is anyways. And you're going to make it harder on yourself if you're not willing to. Harder on yourself, but especially also hard on the people around you. And again, this all those come back around to how to have a happy and healthy marriage over years, over decades. And absolutely being flexible is one of those. So I want to get you out of the mindset of role playing, okay? That you're an adult and you have the ability to take pieces of these roles and discuss them again with your husband to see how that matches his vision. Does that match your joint vision, rather than just moving ahead with what suits your needs and your desires at the moment. Now I want to close with a really beautiful concept that I think that brings this all together, that I wish girls really were encouraged to do at a young age. And I learned about this concept through a colleague of mine who was raised Quaker. And in the Quaker religion, they have the concept of what's called the inner light. I'm going to read a definition here. So the inner light refers to the direct personal experience of God within each person. Quakers believe that every human being carries this divine spark, this living presence of truth and love, regardless of status, creed, gender, or background. It's not just a metaphor. To early Quakers, the inner light was a real, active force, a guiding presence, the inward Christ, the Spirit, the seed. Now, I would equate this, it sounds very similar to the Holy Spirit for me. It sounds like the exception is that Quakers believed that you could experience the inner light no matter your creed, right? So you didn't necessarily have to be a Christian in order to experience, for example, or baptized Christian to experience the Holy Spirit, for example. But what I found really interesting, this conversation came up with a colleague when I learned about this concept, is when I was asking him about how he came to his vocation. Now, I mean vocation more in the the worldly sense. And he said he was just encouraged by his parents to follow that inner light, and that to trust that would lead the way. And I thought that was so interesting because it really contrasted how I was brought up. And now I'm not speaking disparagingly of my parents, because I really appreciate the person I've become. And, absolutely their bringing me up was a huge part of that. But I think could be really helpful that from a very young age, if we were to teach our children to listen to that inner light, but in a very grounded sense. I don't mean this in like an airy-fairy way. I mean it I think it still needs to be very grounded. And I'm relating it back to the trad wife and fitting the molds. Is I think I'll speak from my own experience, I was taught to go in certain directions. So I loved music, language, stuff like that in school. And I followed that, and my parents were supportive of that. But I was also pushed, that was the early movement where girls were really pushed into STEM, and I was pushed in directions as well. And I think there's benefit to that too. You need to spread your wings, right? You need to learn some things. But when it came to choosing my vocation, so to speak, I felt really lost, because at that point in my life, I really felt divided, because I really felt drawn in a certain direction. Let's just say I got married 10 days before my 19th birthday, and that my inner light absolutely was speaking that. That's really what I wanted. And at the same time, I felt very pressured to go to school and get a degree and get a job. But I would do the calculations in my mind, and I'm like, I can't afford this. By the time I get out, they say I would make a good teacher or a nurse or something like that. It's going to take me 10 years to pay off my college loans. And so I felt really conflicted. And that's why in the graphic of today's episode, I put, the quintessential trad wife or boss babe. That's been the division for me for years. Because the reality is that in life, we're going to play multiple roles, and you're going to need to kind of pick and choose from different categories, most likely. There are a few people who are just like 100% they're a homesteader, or the trad wife, and I'm obviously using labels here. There's many other variations, or the boss babe. But usually, especially as women, we're going to be playing multiple roles. And if you try to play all of them 100%, you're going to burn yourself out. And what I'm encouraging you to do is maybe try on for size. Here's a good example. You don't have to become Quaker to try on for size, testing out the inner light. Okay, just take this one concept and tune into what is your inner light saying about life. So maybe you're being called, for example, I was definitely being called to be a wife. When I met my husband to be, was perfect timing. In hindsight, was young by most standards of the day, but I knew in my heart that I couldn't say, just hold on for about 4 years until I get my degree. Then I was putting him on the back burner. I knew, I could sense in my inner self, the inner light was telling me that I had to move on this now. And I want to encourage you as young women, especially, and women of any age, I think so many of us struggle with this. I saw a great podcast. I shared this on my YouTube channel. It's a great episode by Teal Swan about the lose-lose situation that so many women are in these days. And it's very much tied to this, in that we are we're taught, we have this inner, not all of us, but most of us have this desire to be a wife, a mom, to have a home life, but also we were taught and programmed to be the career woman, to be out there in the world and make a name for yourself, or otherwise you're not making anything of yourself. And so it becomes a real tug of war, an internal tug of war. And that's why in the graphic for today's episode is the boss babe trad wife, because they are basically polar opposites. And the reality is, in our day and age, women are most likely going to have to play a few roles, right? And for example, I love being a wife, a homemaker, but I also run a business, not just doing this podcast, but I run an online herbal education business, which involves 3 full-time contractors other than me, 20 some part-time contractors and teachers. And, it's a full-time gig. And so I'm one of those women that has to try to balance it. Now, we'll get into that some other day and what that all entails. But in hindsight, what I want to encourage you women to do, especially if you're feeling really pulled in either direction, is it's rare that you'll be able to actually go 100% in, for example, trad wife, homesteader, boss babe. Okay, I'm using labels because they're easy for us to refer to. You're most likely going to have to innately, because of how society is these days, you're probably going to have to combine those. So what I want to encourage you to do is just take the components out of each one that really match with you and your values. And again, speak with your husband, make sure your goals are in line all along the way, and you will make work what works for you, okay? Because if you want to have that relationship that lasts 20 some years and longer, hopefully, and be happy and growing and happy with where you are as a couple and individually, you have to communicate along the way and be willing to obviously work together. Okay, I could go on so many more examples. I would love to hear your questions. Please put them in the comments, and some of them may spark other episodes. And please like, subscribe, share. If someone came to mind while you were listening to this, you think who could benefit from this. Looks like I might actually get to my second episode. Thought I was going to be able to record 2 of these today, but I felt extra inspired on this one because it touches the heart for me. This is something I really struggled with for years, where I was trying to be these ideals, and it really tore me apart. And sometimes it's not just because you have these ideals, it also might be because life just doesn't open those doors, or it closes doors, and you have to adjust. And so again, just being flexible, staying in communication with your husband are 2 big things, and keep having fun. Get outside the house and do things that keep that spark and that flame going. All right. Would love to hear your comments, your questions. Have a wonderful day. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications. At this point, I'm doing podcasts pretty randomly. They're hard to schedule in with my other work that I'm doing. And so turn on your notifications. They'll probably come up randomly at this point until I can get them scheduled into my schedule again. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.